certainly turn it round, with its back towards me, for fear of seeing eyes behind me looking out of the darkness. I saw Miss Mattie nerving herself up for a confession, and at last out it came. She owned that ever since she had been a girl, she had dreaded being caught by her last leg, just as she was getting into bed, by some one concealed under it. She said, when she was younger and more active, she used to take a flying leap from a distance, and so bring both her legs up safely into bed at once, but that this had always annoyed Deborah, who piqued herself upon getting into bed gracefully, and she had given it up in consequence. But now the old terror would often come over her, especially since Miss Pole's house had been attacked. We had got quite to believe in the fact of the attack having taken place, and yet it was very unpleasant to think of looking under a bed and seeing a man concealed with a great fierce face staring out at you. So she had bethought herself of something. Perhaps I had noticed that she had told Martha to buy her a penny ball, just as children play with, and now she rolled this ball under the bed every night. If it came out on the other side, well and good. If not, she always took care to have her hand on the bell rope, and meant to call out John and Harry, just as if she expected men servants to answer her ring. We all applauded this ingenious contrivance, and Miss Mattie sank back into satisfied silence, with a look at Miss Forster as if to ask for her private weakness. Miss Forster looked askance at Miss Pole, and tried to change the subject a little by telling us that she had borrowed a boy from one of the neighboring cottages, and promised his parents 100 weight of coals at Christmas, and his supper every evening for the loan of him at nights. She had instructed him in his possible duties when he first came, and, finding him sensible, she had given him the major's sword (the major was her late husband), and desired him to put it very carefully behind his pillow at night, turning the edge towards the head of the pillow. He was a sharp lad, she was sure, for, spying out the major's cocked hat, he had said if he might have that to wear, he was sure he could frighten 2 Englishmen, or 4 Frenchmen any day. But she had impressed upon him anew that he was to lose no time in putting on hats or anything else, but if he heard any noise, he was to run at it with his drawn sword. On my suggestion that some accident might occur from such slaughterous and indiscriminate directions, and that he might rush on Jenny getting up to wash, and have spitted her before he had discovered that she was not a Frenchman, Miss Forster said she did not think that was likely, for he was a very sound sleeper, and generally had to be well shaken or cold-pigged in the morning before they could rouse him. She sometimes thought such dead sleep must be owing to the hearty suppers the poor lad ate, for he was half starved at home, and she told Jenny to see that he got a good meal at night. Still, this was no confession of Miss Forster's peculiar timidity, and we urged her to tell us what she thought would frighten her more than anything. She paused and stirred the fire and snuffed the candles, and then she said in a sounding whisper, "Ghost." She looked at Miss Pole as much as to say she had declared it, and would stand by it. Such a look was a challenge in itself. Miss Pole came down upon her with indigestion, spectral illusions, optical delusions, and a great deal out of Dr. Ferrier and Dr. Hibbert besides. Miss Mattie had rather a leaning to ghost, as I have mentioned before, and what little she did say was all on Miss Forster's side, who, emboldened by sympathy, protested that ghosts were a part of her religion, that surely she, the widow of a major in the army, knew what to be frightened at, and what not. In short, I never saw Miss Forster so warm either before or since, for she was a gentle, meek, enduring old lady in most things. Not all the elder wine that ever was mulled could this night wash out of the remembrance of this difference between Miss Pole and her hostess. Indeed, when the elder wine was brought in, it gave rise to a new burst of discussions, for Jenny, the little maiden who staggered under the tray, had to give evidence of having seen a ghost with her own eyes, not so many nights ago, in Darkness Lane, the very lane we were to go through on our way home. In spite of the uncomfortable feeling which this last consideration gave me, I could not help being amused at Jenny's position, which was exceedingly like that of a witness being examined and cross-examined by 2 counsel who are not at all scrupulous about asking leading questions. The conclusion I arrived at was that Jenny had certainly seen something beyond what a fit of indigestion would have caused. A lady all in white and without her head was what she deposed and adhered to, supported by a consciousness of the secret sympathy of her mistress under the withering scorn with which Miss Pole regarded her. And not only she, but many others, had seen this headless lady, who sat by the roadside wringing her hands as in deep grief. Miss Forrester looked at us from time to time with an air of conscious triumph, but then she had not to pass through Darkness Lane before she could bury herself beneath her own familiar bedclothes. We preserved a discreet silence as to the headless lady while we were putting on our things to go home, for there was no knowing how near the ghostly head and ears might be, or what spiritual connection they might be keeping up with the unhappy body in the Darkness Lane, and therefore even Miss Pole felt that it was as well not to speak lightly of such subjects, for fear of vexing or insulting that woebegone trunk. At least, so I conjecture, for instead of the busy clatter usual in the operation, we tied on our cloaks as sadly as mutes at a funeral. Miss Mattie drew the curtains round the windows of the chair to shut out disagreeable sights, and the men, either because they were in spirits that their laborers were so nearly ended, or because they were going downhill, set off at such a round and merry pace that it was all Miss Pole and I could do to keep up with them. She had breath for nothing beyond an imploring, "Don't leave me," uttered as she clutched my arm so tightly that I could not have quitted her, ghost or no ghost. What a relief it was when the men, weary of their burden and their quick trot, stopped just where Headingley Causeway branches off from Darkness Lane. Miss Pole unloosed me and caught at one of the men. "Could not you take Miss Mattie round by Headingley Causeway? The pavement in Darkness Lane jolts so, and she is not very strong." A smothered voice was heard from inside of the chair. "Oh, pray go on. What is the matter? What is the matter? I will give you 6 pence more to go on very fast. Pray don't stop here." "And I'll give you a shilling," said Miss Pole with tremulous dignity, "if you'll go by Headingley Causeway." The two men grunted acquiescence and took up the chair and went along the causeway, which certainly answered Miss Pole's kind purpose of saving Miss Mattie's bones, for it was covered with soft, thick mud, and even a fall there would have been easy till the getting up came, when there might have been some difficulty in extrication.